On today's program, we're looking at 3 questions around the Israel-Hamas war based on developments so far. Number 1, will Hamas release more hostages in the coming days? Number 2, could the conflict expand into a regional one involving the United States? And number 3, does China have a tangible role as a peacemaker in the conflict? We'll come to those questions in a moment, but first, a look at some of those trapped in the middle of this war. 2 elderly Israeli hostages have been released by the Islamist militant group Hamas. They were among the more than 200 people being held captive by Hamas in Gaza. Their release comes just days after 2 other hostages were released. The women were first transferred to Egypt, then handed over to the Israeli military before being taken to a medical facility in Tel Aviv.
Medical teams bundled the freed Israeli hostages into waiting ambulances. This footage on Egyptian TV revealing the latest release at Egypt's border with Gaza. The women, aged 79 and 85, were kidnapped by Hamas militants from their homes during the terrorist attack on Israel more than 2 weeks ago. Finally free, they were quickly transferred to Tel Aviv for treatment. There returned some rare good news amid the conflict.
We have received the 2 hostages. We are very excited. They look okay. Their medical condition is okay. And they're speaking to us. When we received them, we brought them to their family members. The meeting was very, very moving.
Their homecoming, a huge relief.
I believed this moment would come. I wanted this moment to come. It doesn't matter if I believed it or not. This moment is here.
While their return is welcome, the women's husbands are among the 220 people Israel says are still being held captive by Hamas.
Bring them home!
As uncertainty surrounds their fates, their families' fear and frustration are mounting. Israel has been amassing troops and weapons at the Gaza border for days. But US media reports say Washington has advised it to delay an anticipated ground offensive to allow negotiations to free more hostages. An outcome their waiting families say can't come soon enough.
And earlier, my colleague Claire Richardson asked our correspondent in Jerusalem what else we know about the 2 hostages who have been released.
Interestingly, one of the prisoners that was released and her husband are relatively well-known peace activists, and they've worked most of their lives assisting Gazans who are seeking medical treatment in Israel. They would go to the border, help with the transfer and bring them into Israel to get receive medical treatment. So it's not clear whether that had anything to do with the release, with the decision to pick these 2 women to be released, but it's certainly very interesting background there. You can see in the video as well that as they're walking out, that with the Hamas militant who is taking them to the ICRC humanitarian workers for the exchange, that she turns around, she shakes the hand of the Hamas militant. So that is perhaps an indication also of how the hostages are being treated, and that they perhaps gives hope for the others that are still being held, that they're still in a fairly decent condition.
Indeed. Do we have any insights into how this release came to be? What do we know about the deal that secured their release?
Well, we don't know a huge amount about the deal. We know it was brokered between Egypt and Hamas. Days of negotiations have been going into this prisoner exchange. In fact, there were rumours earlier yesterday that some 50 hostages might actually be released, the dual nationals being held. Obviously, details still quite scant. These are just rumours at this stage, but it's being reported that that is still in negotiations. Now, Qatar have been playing a big role in these hostage releases. We saw the other 2 a few days ago, and these 2, and they will continue to play that role. Egypt also involved. Now, it's thought that Israel was not party to these negotiations, but that they were still somehow involved in that there was a cessation of bombing in order to allow for the hostages' safe return, and also for the humanitarian workers who were receiving them.
So we now have 4 people in total who've been freed by Hamas. Where you are in Israel, is there now more optimism that we might see more people released in the coming days?
I think there is a cautious optimism. As I mentioned, we've been hearing that potentially in the coming hours or days, another 50 hostages may be released. It's not clear whether they'll be released in one go. We know that so far, Hamas has not received anything in return, so there's still a chance that they'll try and use the releases as for more negotiation. But we do expect that we will be seeing more hostages released. And there is also an indication that the US are calling for this planned, this imminent, this expected ground invasion to be held off in order for that to happen.
But there could also be other military factors behind that. Former Commanding General of US Army Europe, Ben Hodges, told our Brussels Bureau Chief Alexandra von Namen what those factors could be.
I think the fact that they haven't started the ground operation yet is either because they're not satisfied with the conditions, they have not destroyed enough of the Hamas leadership and infrastructure with air power yet, or they're still doing what we call intelligence preparation of the battlefield, where you're building up or improving your understanding of where the enemy is, where the civilians are, where the tunnels are. That's a part of it.
The fear is that that ground offensive, whenever it begins, could escalate beyond just the Gaza Strip. Experts are warning Israel could be facing multiple fronts, including with Hezbollah militants in the north, in Lebanon, the West Bank, and also militants in Syria. That's not all. There's fears Iran too could get involved, not to mention Iran-backed proxies in Yemen. It's partly this risk of a wider spillover of the conflict that's prompted the United States to deploy ships in the region as a deterrent. For instance, the US has already deployed the carrier, the USS Gerald R. Ford, in the eastern Mediterranean near Israel. The USS Dwight D. Eisenhower has been ordered to join the Ford as well. In addition, a range of other US warships are also on their way into the region. So what do these US military deployments mean, and what are the risks of a wider spillover of the conflict into the region? To answer those questions, I'm joined by Christina Kausch from the think tank, the German Marshall Fund of the United States. Christina, lots to unpack here. I'd like to look at the US military role in particular first. Very simply, what exactly is it?
Well, first of all, the deployment of aircraft carriers and other military capabilities to the Middle East in reaction to the Hamas attacks on Israel on October 7th by the United States is a measure of reestablishing deterrence. The attacks by Hamas, as you know, were very much of a surprise to the Israeli intelligence and military and to the region and to the world, because the Israeli military was considered too strong for something like this to happen. So the first step that the United States is trying to accomplish here is to reestablish the shattered deterrence of the Israeli state, basically sending the message, we have Israel's back. Anybody else who wants to attempt something like this, don't. And I think President Biden has made this very clear in multiple messages.
Just talking about that deterrence, what form does that take? Because some days back, for example, we had the instance of the USS Carney in the Red Sea intercepting 3 missiles fired from Yemen that were headed potentially towards Israel. Are we going to see more of this sort of a support role from the United States when it comes to deterrence?
Well, it's not only a deterrence question for Israel. Also, we shouldn't forget that the United States has multiple U.S. citizens as hostages involved in this. So that's a direct concern for U.S. interests. And also U.S. military facilities across the region, Iraq, and among others, are in danger, and have been attacked in the last few days with by different means in a minor scale. So there is also there's also a danger, there's also a concern for U.S. security in the region. But of course, mainly this is directed as a warning towards Iran. Although, to my awareness, there is no conclusive evidence as of yet that proves a really direct role by Iran in the planning of the 7th October attacks. It is clear that Iran has been funding and supporting Hamas for years, alongside its other proxies in the region, Hezbollah and others, and that one way or another, this is an expression that the US, that Europe have underestimated the destructive role of Iran in the region, and that deterrence against Iran towards, using this using this opportunity to wreak more havoc in the region really must be deterred at this point.
Let's just expand that into the wider region, because we keep hearing of warnings that Israel could be facing a potential multi-front war, but depending on whom you ask, different fronts come into play. What would you say are the fronts one needs to look at?
The situation is very fluid. We don't know whether this is going to be mainly a local dispute with the involvement of external actors, or to which degree this is going to develop into regional wildfire. I think we need to be very careful at this point, because the strategic calculations of all the actors involved change by the hour as news shuffle in. So I think nobody really knows. But the concern is that as Israel prepares a ground invasion into the Gaza Strip, that Hezbollah will open a front in the north and attack Israel from the north, as it has already threatened. Whether or not this is going to happen, nobody knows. But if this happens, of course, this would turn the whole conflict into a regional conflict. It would most definitely increase the involvement also in the United States. This would practically turn the conflict into a confrontation with Iran. And we're not there at this stage yet. And with all the implications this would have for the positioning of the different regional actors of the United States, for the different other conflicts and difficult situations that we have in the region, the conflict in Syria, where Iran is also very much involved, the security of Lebanon, the security situation of other American allies in the region, Jordan, Egypt, spill over to Europe, the humanitarian situation. So there's a whole tail of issues that would be coming into play if such an attack happened.
Let me just try and ask you to look into your crystal ball. Do you think Hezbollah will launch a full-scale attack against Israel?
I don't know, and I don't think any serious analyst, unless they have insider information into Hezbollah, can claim that they do. There are multiple considerations here. So on the one hand, there is an argument for Hezbollah to make that if the Israeli military is concentrated on its efforts in Gaza, then there is a good window of opportunity for Hezbollah to attack from the north. At the same time, there's also the point to make that all the actors involved, including Hezbollah and including Iran, and of course Israel and the Palestinian people, obviously, have reasons to prefer de-escalation. So there's a lot of posturing also. There's when the Iranian government makes sweeping statements about them wanting to, about the possibility of, striking back on Israel and so on, and also the statements of Hezbollah along those lines. We don't know to which degree this is, they are bluffing, they're just posturing for public diplomacy reasons, because the Iranian government has established itself in this conflict as the defender of the Palestinians. They're trying to create the impression that the United States, Europe, the Arab world doesn't care about the Palestinians, and the defenders of the so-called axis of resistance, are the ones who will stand in for the rights of the Palestinians. So this posturing should also be interpreted in this line.
We'll leave it there for the time being, but thanks so much for bringing us all that context in this very fluid situation. Christina Kausch, thank you so much. As tensions rise in the region, China has called for a ceasefire. It has sent its Middle East envoy Zhai Jun to the region with a purpose. The foreign ministry in Beijing clarified what that is.
Zhai Jun plans to use his visit to the Middle East to promote a ceasefire, stop the violence and cool down the situation.
This comes as China's top diplomat Wang Yi is himself headed to Washington later in the week. The visit is ostensibly to put the US-China bilateral relationship back on track, but the Israel-Hamas war looms large. US officials want to see a more constructive approach from China, where it uses its influence in the region to prevent the conflict from widening. Already on Monday, Wang Yi spoke to his Israeli and Palestinian Authority counterparts. He is reported to have told Israeli Foreign Minister Eli Cohen, quote, "The current Palestinian-Israeli conflict affects the entire world and involves major choices between war and peace. All countries have the right to self-defense, but they should abide by international humanitarian law and protect the safety of civilians." In a separate phone conversation with Palestinian Foreign Minister Riyad al-Maliki, Wang said, and I quote, "China deeply sympathizes with the difficult situation of Palestine, especially the people of Gaza. China calls for an immediate ceasefire and an end to the war to ensure the most basic living conditions for the people of Gaza." Joining me now for more is DW China analyst Clifford Coonan. Clifford, what is China's interest in the Israel-Hamas war?
Well, I think we've seen on many occasions in recent years how China is seeking to match its growing economic power with political and diplomatic muscle. And I think that this feeds very much into that situation. It wants to boost its status as a superpower to rival the United States. It also sees itself as a champion, is portraying itself as a champion of the global South. So there's a lot going on here. But at the same time, the gap between what China says and what it actually does is, and how it takes its place in global events is enormous.
So what you're saying is basically this is more optics and self-interest on the part of China than anything else.
I think it is, although optics and self-interest are often quite mixed when it comes to how China is portraying itself, because it's very aware of how things look. And particularly when it comes to things which it doesn't see as its necessarily as its core interests, but which are very central to its boosting its global position. There's a lot here to do with energy security, for example. There are a lot of these sort of issues going on here. So it wants to present itself as being a global player, while at the same time trying to boost its position on the global stage.
We've seen China's statements, and China is talking about a ceasefire and it's talking about peace, but at the same time you have the fact that Hamas killed 1,400 people, mostly civilians, in that attack in Israel earlier this month. It is also designated as a terror organization by the US, the European Union and Germany as well. Yet China has refrained from condemning Hamas's actions. Why is that?
Well, in some ways, this is related to the fact that China doesn't really do condemnation unless it's about its core interests, such as separatists in Xinjiang, as they describe them, or to do with Taiwan independence movements. How they see this, though, is as something that's very much related to America. And so they're going to try and avoid the use of words, condemnation, and their links to Palestine go way back, as they see it. They've had from the times of Chairman Mao back in the 60s and supporting the independence movement then, and various sort of movements which then became terror organizations such as Hamas. There's always been links, while not directly to Hamas itself, but to militant organizations. And I think against this background, it doesn't like to use the word terrorist. But then it always avoids condemning issues overseas anyway, unless, as I say, it relates to its core interests.
So no condemnation of Hamas, but at the same time, China now says it respects Israel's right to self-defense. Is there a change of tune here?
Well, I think one of the things about stepping up to the global stage is that you have to kind of take sides. China doesn't like taking sides in this sort of thing. We've seen this in Ukraine, where it's tacitly backing Russia, but at the same time trying to avoid publicly supporting Russia and condemning it, has refused also to condemn the Russian invasion of Ukraine. In this one, it realizes now, particularly with Wang Yi going to Washington, and with it becoming more than just an issue for the Americans, basically, that it has to sort of make some kind of statement. So it can't just avoid showing some sort of backing for Israel or understanding for Israel's position when it comes to the Hamas attack, for example, without outright condemning Hamas, as we've mentioned. So it's trying to do this balancing act right now.
So with Wang Yi now headed to Washington, what is he going to say about the Israel-Hamas war in the United States?
Well, I think that's going to be fascinating. I mean, I think the bigger issue here is going to be US-China relations, and that's what Wang Yi is going there to do, to try and set up a meeting between Xi Jinping and Joe Biden. And I think they will definitely discuss the situation in Gaza and the Israel-Hamas conflict. But I think at this one, there's going to be all kinds of back channels opening. I think it's going to be a very interesting meeting.
One to watch. DW China analyst Clifford Coonan, thanks for breaking that down for us. So a lot has happened in more than 2 weeks, but it's worth remembering what happened on the 7th of October. Kibbutz Be'eri in Israel was one of the first communities that was attacked by Hamas terrorists. But many residents are yet to be located, and authorities are still trying to identify bodies. DW's Max Zander visited the kibbutz as part of an organized press tour. A word of warning for our viewers: the following report contains some graphic descriptions of the Hamas attack.
Security is tight in Kibbutz Be'eri today. But at dawn on the morning of October 7th, the army was nowhere to be seen. The more than 1,000 people living here were among the first to be attacked by Hamas fighters. They roamed the kibbutz for hours, firing machine guns, grenades, rocket launchers. The Hamas-led terrorists moved from house to house over hours, killing civilians or taking them hostage. Today, this kibbutz is deserted. All what's left are burnt, destroyed houses and a community in ruins. The Israeli authorities want the world to see this and hear from people who were there.
They burned the house on them, smoke them out. And when they finally opened the doors because they couldn't breathe anymore, they decided who's to live, who's to die.
Rami Gold was part of a small group defending the kibbutz. He said they fired till they ran out of bullets.
And I got to tell you that story because 2 angels came. 2 people from reserve soldiers. I have no idea where they came from. Came to us, gave us ammunition and a cell phone so we can call our families to tell them we're okay. And we kept on going, kept on fighting until it was dark, till the army arrived.
When the fighting stopped, emergency responders looking for survivors found scenes of horror.
She was butchered open. The stomach was small children, a boy and a girl, hands tied to the back and tortured. And I'll say tortured now, yes, I'll say it. The father was without an eye. They took out his eye. The mother a breast was cut off. And while the children were brutally attacked, and they are sitting in the middle and eating the food of the holiday meal that this family was supposed to eat.
Physical evidence of what happened at places around the country arrives here at a makeshift morgue in central Israel. These are some of the up to 200 unaccounted for people. More are still being found.
We are working day and night at shifts, trying to identify each and every one.
This is hard because people were disfigured, mutilated, burned.
We are here doing what we're doing because we think this is a holy mission. For us, identifying the last casualties and all of the civilians that got killed is so important. It's for us, we want to give them their final respect.
Families waiting to bury their dead and those who saw what happened are angry as well as bereft. At Kibbutz Be'eri, Hamas killed more than 100 people, around 10% of the community. For Rami Gold, whose sister-in-law was killed that morning, there can only be one response. Israel must completely destroy Gaza.
They made a terrible mistake. They hurt us. It was very bad. But the damage they will suffer will be even worse. And the idea is they will never think of doing that again. That's the only way we can live together, by them understanding that they can't do it to us anymore.
Emergency responder Yossi Landau, who saw the horrors, says Hamas cannot be part of the future.
We went through a lot. We went through the Holocaust. We went through a lot. We'll be strong. The world is supporting us. Yes, we want the peace. It's a very important thing, the peace. Yes, but not with Hamas.
Peace seems a faraway prospect here in the ruins of Kibbutz Be'eri.